All right, welcome back to the shop. Another day, super cold and windy outside. I don't really feel that well, but I really want to make some progress on the Datsun here because one of these days it actually is going to be nice outside. I'd like to drive this hunk of crap. I'm not doing any more body work. Most of the sheet metal work has been done on this thing, at least as far as I'm going to take it this year. I do still have to repair the lower parts of the front fenders. I don't know if I'm going to get to that anytime soon or if I may just sheet metal screw that and drive it anyway. But today, the main thing I'm after, flipping the crossmember for the engine in this car. I've got it over here on the bench. I took it out a couple weeks ago. I just have to cut the center out of it and flip it around. I haven't found a good video on this, so that's what I'm going to be doing today. This is the engine crossmember that came out of my Datsun. Right here you can see there were some aftermarket mounts welded onto this crossmember. The previous owner was swapping a different engine in it, so those were put on there, but I'm actually gonna, in a way, go back to the factory frame stands. I have a second crossmember down there that is rusted out. I'm gonna use that as a template to build the frame stands right there where the motor mounts sit. Anyway, this is a view of the crossmember as it sits in the car. I'm sorry, no it's not. This is how it sits in the car. No, it's not. This is how it sits in the car. So, from the factory, these 510s were a rear sump oil pan. So that's why this crossmember kicks forward like that. Anybody who's ever done a KA swap in one of these knows that the KA is a front sump oil pan. You can't put a front sump oil pan on a rear sump crossmember. So, the simple solution is to take the factory crossmember, mark it out, cut it, flip the center section, weld it back together. These two pickup points here on either side bolt to the front subframe, and then these two areas here are where the pivot shafts for the front control arms, the front lower control arms, mount into. So, as long as the relationship between these bolt holes and these bolt holes and this boss and this boss all stay the same, you can take this center section, cut it, flip it, and weld it back together, and you shouldn't have any trouble, one, mounting it back in the car, or two, hooking up your suspension again. So here's my plan how I'm going to flip this thing. I have here a piece of your average cheesy angle iron, cut roughly to the width of this crossmember. I hit this quick with the flap wheel, or as Puddin says, the flap attack. I cleaned up the crossmember minimally. Doesn't even look that clean. Would you believe I even hit that with the wheel? The plan is get this thing roughly centered on here, hit a couple of decent sized tack welds here, a couple over here, on the other side here, a couple of tacks, same thing on the other end. That is going to lock this all together on the top, and then I'll sneak in here and make my two cuts. I do have a bandsaw. I'm hoping that the bandsaw is going to get that easily. If not, I may have to do some fancy stuff with a cutoff wheel to get started and then maybe cut the rest with the bandsaw. So I'll start the time lapse here. We'll get this thing buzzed together and get to cutting. All right, here's what I've got going on. Crossmember's now flipped upside down. Here's my mark where I need to cut it. And if you can kind of see, it doesn't look like it on camera. It's probably just because stupid bandsaw. Make sure when you buy a bandsaw, you buy a $100 piece of junk from China on the internet. If you can see, the bandsaw blade is pretty well lined up with that line. Now, depending on what way I move the camera, it looks like it's way off. But I'm gonna go as far as I can with this bandsaw because I'll get a nice cut. Once I do this side, I'll shift over to the other side and get that one going. Anything I got to finish off, I'll do either with the cutoff wheel or maybe even the plasma cutter or the Sawzall. Alright, so here we are. It's cut and it's flipped. So this is actually the way that it's going to sit in the car. Now, don't get too worried about these gaps here. I'm MIG welding this. This one is a little excessive. I might actually cut a piece and throw it in here, but there was a extra plate. I don't know if you can see, there was a plate added on to the top of this, and that plus the weld over here kind of gave us our gap. So I don't know if you can see the crack there between the layers. So the top of this cross member is actually very close to level with the original. It just looks worse because of this. So don't worry about those gaps. I'm going to fill them all in, and this thing's getting a coat of black spray paint. It'll be under the car. It should be more than strong enough. I may even add a couple of fish plates on here. I don't know. But now I'll get this cleaned up all the way and get it zapped back together. All right, here we go. It's all finished being welded. Does it look pretty? Absolutely not. But it will definitely do the job for this car. Feels pretty solid. I don't believe anything moved around. There was a little bit of tweaking once these cuts were made and the center section was out, but I was able to, tilt these pieces out to get this piece back in. Now I realized I lost probably a little bit of material in between when it was cut because of the width of the blade on either side, but I did add a section back over here to even it out. So, and there was some weld overhang over here. I'm thinking that it should, for the most part, be dead on. I may need to tweak the alignment when the thing goes back together, but as for now, that's the new cross member right there. This is actually backwards, but this is how it's going to sit in the car now. And honestly, it doesn't look that bad. I mean, I think, the old saying goes, a grinder and paint for the welder I ain't. That's definitely going to apply here. Some of these gaps weren't perfect. Obviously, you can see there's 2 welds here. That's where I had to add a section because my measuring skills are awesome. And I measured this perfect the first time, so I only had to adjust it by 1/4 inch or so. Oh, looks like I missed a spot right there. Have to hit that. Otherwise, I think she's done. I'm gonna let her cool all the way down before I cut the tacks on that bar on the top. Then I just gotta grind these a little bit, wire wheel the whole thing, and then slop as much Rust-Oleum or Por 15 or whatever I want on there, because once it's in the car, you'll never see it again. And actually, let me back up. I think before I do any of that, I'll finish grinding these off here and over there, the little, what's remaining of the old welds. I'll grind that all flush, and then I will actually make new frame stands using those frame stands right here as a template. So I plan on just recreating each piece of this out of paper and then roughly assembling it, tacking it together, and then blasting it onto this cross member. I can't use these. I know you're probably wondering, you're like, why don't you just use these frame stands or use this cross member? Because, well, it might look okay from where you're sitting. I don't know if you can see, but it's rusted out on the inside. So this cross member is actually structurally compromised. That's not gonna work. This guy over here, you're probably thinking this is structurally compromised, but there's probably about a 1/2 spool of weld wire in there, so I'm confident it'll hold a little 4-cylinder. All right, it is a couple days later. This thing has had time to cool. So I'm going to cut the tacks, and then I'm going to quick mock this up on the car just to make sure that the bolt holes line up. Once I know that it fits good in the car, I'll bring it back over here and then wire wheel it and paint it black after a little bit of grinding. And then I think it's ready for fabricating the frame stands, or in this case the engine mount brackets. So pulled that piece of angle off the top, really quickly ground down the 4 tacks that I have. I'll spend a little bit more time on this before I shoot it with paint, but to get you in here a little bit closer, these are the remnants of the tabs that were on here before. So that's what was on there before. It looks like a shock mount or something. Anyway, I know I have to grind that down a little bit more. Don't mind how ugly this looks, I don't care. Just got test fitted on the car now. Just make sure nothing's moved around. All right, so if you can see here, I just have the nuts back on, and this is like just basically a big flat washer. So this is one side, and over here with the other side hanging down, I lost that nut. I don't know where it is. I got sucked up by the vacuum cleaner, or I swept it into the trash. Either way, excuse all this wiring. These 2 bolts and these 2 bolts, that's what hold the cross member to the front of the car. So what I'm going to do right now is attempt to just hold the cross member up, make sure that it fits on those 2 bolts over there, lines up over here. As long as everything bolts up, this thing should be good. So I'm going to get that situated in there, and I'll pick back up after I've got it hung in there. Of course, I'm missing one of these. This is going to be super fun. We'll hold up here. Sure, yeah, just thread on there. Anytime's fine. There. That's better. Now again, on this side, I only have one. I have one of the nuts. I have both bolts. They're both here. I don't know what I did with the other nut. It probably got kicked around somewhere, but I'm sure this is some weird fine thread metric shit, but so I don't know what you guys can really see from there. This cross member does bolt right back up to the subframe like it did before. All right, so here's a view from up above. You can see cross member sits right where it's supposed to, but now it's just flipped backwards. So everything bolts up okay. There is a little bit of slop in these bolts, or these bolt holes anyway. This will allow me to get that front sump oil pan in here. So this might look like there's a ton of room, but in this Datsun, I think the distance from the cross member to the lower core support, I want to say that that's maybe 18 inches at most. However, for the KA that's going in here, this should be all right. We may run into a little bit of a problem with the rear steer, but we'll solve that when we get there. So, cross member is cut, flipped, welded, ready to go. I'm going to spend some time grinding on this and then shoot some black paint on it, just so that it doesn't get all rusty and stuff until I can get fabbing up the motor mount brackets. So that's what I'm going to do now. All right, gotta check to see if I'm in frame. Am I really, really tall? I don't know, can't tell. You guys can. So here it is after 30 minutes of grinding. At this point, I think I may cut this out and weld in just a little bitty patch just to make sure it doesn't get a whole lot worse. this thing is cut, flipped, ready to be fabricated for the frame stands. So hopefully in the next couple weeks here or something, I can get a friend over here and we can mock up the engine and trans to go into the Datsun. So the Datsun's currently a scrap pile, a garbage pile right now, but there's the KA, and the 5-speed is over here on the shelf. You might be able to see the bell housing back there. One of these days coming up, we'll take the two of those, bolt them together, throw the cross member in, and then slam the whole thing down into the engine bay here. Then we can look at the trans tunnel and see how much of that we have to put back. I mean, the cross member is a big step. That'll at least allow us to get the engine put in, and that way we can get, you know, dimensions and stuff laid out for a cross member for the transmission, and finally get started on all the fun stuff with this car. So anyway, until next time.